Okay, welcome to another episode of Mom Talk. We are here with Tala Hershey today, speech therapist. Is that correct? Your actual
Yes.
title? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
We're so happy you wanted to be on. This is so fun for us to meet new people and different states. We love it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your family, get to know you a little bit before we
Yeah,
get started.
sure. So, as you said, my name is Tala Hershey. I am a pediatric speech therapist. I've been one for about a decade now. I live in New York with my family. I have two toddler boys. They're 4 and 2, so my house is very loud all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of listeners understand that.
Yeah.
And I have had a private practice in speech therapy for about 5 years now, and I do parent coaching. So I coach parents of toddlers on how to learn the skills and strategies that I know as a speech therapist that all speech therapists use to get their toddlers talking at home.
How did you decide to get into that?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of a just happened upon. So back to COVID when, great things happened, right?
Yeah.
So during COVID, it was right around the start of my private practice, and all of my clients I had to see virtually all of a sudden. So if you were, 20 months old and you were getting speech therapy with me, it had to be virtual. And for anyone listening, anyone who has toddlers, there's no 20-month-old in the world that's going to sit and stare at me on a screen. I don't take offense to that, but it's just not happening. And so I had to sort of come up with a way to do speech therapy on the computer and be successful, right? We want it to be productive. So what I started doing was I would have the parents set up whatever room they wanted, whatever toys they wanted. They'd set up the computer in one space so I could see the whole room, and they would put like AirPods in or something. So I could see what was going on and I could hear what was going on, but they couldn't hear me and I wasn't a distraction. They were just playing with their
Hmm.
parents. And so as they're playing with their parents, I would be in the parents' ear and I'd be able to tell them, try it this way. Oh, let's try this strategy. Why don't you introduce that toy over there in the corner and let's incorporate it? And I started guiding them this way. And what I started realizing was happening is the kids who were getting speech therapy this way were being discharged in a few months versus kids who were coming to me in my office once a week, twice a week, traditional speech therapy. And they were with
Hmm.
me for years, honestly. It was like such a stark contrast. And so I sort of took a step back and was like, what's happening here, basically? And what I realized was happening is that I was training the parents to be me in the room because I couldn't be in the room. And I tell this to all my clients, and they'll tell you as well. Once you learn these strategies and how to do it, how to talk to your toddlers, how to incorporate it, you can't unlearn them. It just becomes part of you.
Right.
So these parents ultimately were using these strategies all the time, not just during our sessions, because you can't just sort of change your ways again back to the old way. So their kids were getting speech therapy all the time. And I was like, wait a second, this could
Yeah.
be something really great.
That's
So
so
that's when the
smart.
seed was planted. Yeah.
And you're in your own environment, in your own home, working with your kids. That's so smart of you to think to do that.
Thank you. And the flip side is it's incorporated into your daily routine. So if you're home with your toddlers, you have your routine set. If I said to you, okay, now you need to set aside a half hour, 45 minutes, we're going to play and we're going to work on speech, you're going to be like, I can't do that. I don't have a half hour to set aside. But if you can do it while you're at the grocery store, or you can do it while you're unloading the dishwasher or doing laundry,
Hmm.
that's doable. And the thing about toddlers is they don't think of unloading the dishwasher or the whatever as work. They think it's play. They think everything is play. And so they love to do it. So if you can incorporate these strategies during all those times that are sort of lost time with your toddler, you're just maximizing the amount of modeling and language modeling that you're giving them.
Okay. That's great. Yeah. Uh, so have you seen recently where they changed the chart on words by a certain age?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
what are your thoughts on that?
they've changed a lot of norms actually recently. I don't know like what's going on in the research world, but so right now the norm, the average. So there's a difference between milestones and average. Milestones is like the least amount that we expect at a certain age. Average is what the average number of toddlers have. And I think that's confusing to parents also because when you Google, like, how many words should my toddler have, you're going to get a milestone and you're going to get a norm, and they are
Mhm.
starkly different.
Okay.
So the average number that we like to see around 12, 13 months is 5 to 6 words that they're using consistently. Around 18 months, this number jumps up. The average number is between 30 and 50 words.
Okay.
And then between 18 months and 24 months, this is a huge gap, and something that I really want parents to realize is this number from 30 to 50 words around 18 months skyrockets to about 200, 300 words at
Oh,
age 2.
wow.
And they're starting to put 2 words together. You're starting to lose count. And so these are alarming numbers
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of parents to see, especially when a lot of what they're being told by pediatricians who are wonderful, but they're not specialists, right? From well-meaning family, from friends, is they're saying a few words, just wait, give it a few months, see what happens, right? And then they get to be
Mm-hmm.
2, and then they get to be a little over 2. And that's when parents really start to worry.
Yeah. So my daughter, she was in speech therapy at, I think we started at like 15 months
Hmm.
because she had stalled out, in my opinion. Like there was no
Hmm.
more progression. She wouldn't put 2 words together. And it might have been closer to 18 months. The pediatrician was like, well, we can wait, just like you were saying. And she was like, or I can give you a referral to speech and let them determine that. And I was like, please, like,
Yeah.
no offense to the pediatricians, but like you said, this isn't your specialty.
Exactly. And pediatricians, of course, are wonderful. If my child is sick, I'm going right to the pediatrician. They are medical professionals, but they're not speech therapists. They're not physical therapists. Like there's a reason that these specialists exist. And I think what you mentioned is really important. You actually don't need a referral in a lot of places for speech therapy. You can go and do it on your own, and you can request one from your pediatrician. So if your mom gut is like, not really sure, just ask for one. Like there's absolutely no harm in getting a specialist to look at it.
Yeah, like I definitely am glad I went ahead and did it. And she did need some speech therapy, and we were there for, I don't know, 6, 7 months. It wasn't a long time for
Mhm.
us, but it still definitely helped.
Yeah, so the majority of the population that I work with are late talkers, which maybe your daughter sort of falls into this category. These are children between like 12 and 30-ish months, younger than 32 months, that don't have, they're not meeting the expressive language norms, the average, but their receptive language, they understand everything. And their social skills are great. And the only concern really is that expressive language part. And so these are considered late talkers. And a lot of the time, late talkers, they just need that jump start. Like you said, just a few months of
Yeah,
really specialized, tailored language modeling strategies.
yeah,
And then they're off, then they're caught up.
absolutely. Yeah, she
But you
got
don't
caught
want to
up, I feel
miss,
like, fairly quick. Yeah,
yeah, but you don't want to miss that window, right? So the
right.
birth to 3 window for language development is crucial. It's the most crucial window. And I hate seeing kids fall through the cracks because of parents didn't follow their gut or they didn't know what to do, right? And so a lot of what's happening actually across America and definitely in other parts of the world, there is a shortage of speech therapists. So I actually live in an area in a state where we're oversaturated with speech therapists. I would say I'm looking out my window right now, like probably every fourth house has a speech therapist that lives there. But in much of the country, that's not the case. And so parents are sitting on wait lists. They are traveling. My
I
Zoom
love
is very
that.
my Zoom is very responsive. They're sitting on wait lists. They are traveling 45 minutes for a 30-minute session. where the child needs 10 minutes to first warm up, right? They're getting speech therapy twice a month, maybe. There's just, the system is failing a lot of people, unless you go private, which is also incredibly expensive. So my goal with training parents and having these resources and trainings and abilities to work with me is so that you can do it right at home. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need a referral. You don't even need to talk to anyone about it. You can just like hop online and say, Tala, let's do this. I want to learn strategies, and you're done. That's it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So
How
that's the
many
goal.
sessions do you normally do with a new parent?
So it's sort of different. So I have a training that you can get, and it's self-paced learning that has all the strategies that you need in that training. When you work directly with me, we do weekly coaching calls. There, you get a resource library of about over 30 modules. Again, it's very self-paced. So at each coaching call, I'll meet you where you are. If you haven't had a chance to watch any of them that week, we're just going to talk about what you can incorporate that week. But there's a lot of learning that happens and guidance. And I have a 4-month program where you can work with me for 4 months, weekly coaching calls to get them on track.
Okay. What's one of the first things that you would want a parent to notice to call you? Is it, you know how some kids, the parents can understand it, but nobody else can?
Mm-hmm.
Like, would that be a reason to kind of get
So,
started age appropriately?
yeah, so that's a really good point. Let's touch on first words for a second, because there are a lot of parents that come to me and say, my child doesn't say the end of their words, or they say this for this word, and I don't really know. First words are anything consistent for an object. So if they say wa for water, that's water, 100%. If they say ba for ball and ba for book, 2 different words. They're using them consistently. They just sound the same. Early basic signs count as first words. Environmental noises, vroom, whoosh, wee, those count as first words. Or animal sounds, those count also.
Okay.
Yeah. Fun facts. So parents do come to me and say, I'm the only one who can understand my child. That's a little bit different. That I would put in the articulation category, where I would typically recommend one-to-one traditional speech therapy for articulation. For language, it's more, my toddler is, like you mentioned, 15 months old, and they're not really talking, or they're not learning new words regularly, which is what we want to see. So I don't expect a toddler at 18 months to wake up on their 18-month birthday and start using 40 words, unless they've already been there, right? They're already on that trajectory. But what I do want to see is that they are regularly learning new words. That's what I want to see. So when that's not happening, that's when parents call me and say, you know, they're 15, 16, 18 months old, they have 3 words or maybe less.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Like Remy, she just really stalled out. And I was like, you were like progressing and then plateau.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, we got to look into that.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's just that it's knowing the right strategies. And there are specific strategies, right? Because I get all these parents that say, well, I'm talking to them all day, I'm narrating, I'm reading, I'm doing all the things that everyone tells me to do, but actually those aren't strategies, right? Those
Well, it was
are
so interesting to go and like see everything that the speech therapist was like telling me to do at home, but also like showing and doing in the room with her. I was just like, wow, like it's nothing like mind blowing, but it was mind blowing to me because I was like, why didn't I think of that? Like, I almost felt silly. I
exactly.
was like, why did somebody have to tell me to do this? Because like it's very easy to incorporate.
Exactly. And it's just something that you might not know. You haven't been taught it, right? And
Yeah.
so my goal is to teach it to as many parents as possible because like you said, and I say this all the time, I'm not a magician. Speech therapists aren't magicians. We just know these strategies. We just know how to do them. And they're so easy for me to teach you how to do. But if you don't know, then you're going to Google it and you're going to go on social media and they're going to tell you to keep talking and keep reading and keep narrating. But when that's not working, you got to switch something up. you got to change something.
How do you feel about comparing children? You know, if your firstborn did this by this time, your secondborn, or even comparing like boys to girls, like
Hmm.
their
Yeah.
timelines.
I I feel very strongly about comparing and not how you think I will, because
Okay.
we are always going to compare. We are human. We are parents. We're always going to compare our children to our children to other children, right? It's also how we learn what's normal and what's not, right? If we see a toddler doing something, we reflect on our children. I'm never going to tell a parent, don't compare, because that's impossible. It's setting people up for failure, right? But what I will say is if you are comparing and you do realize that maybe your toddler, you have an 18-month-old who's not walking yet. Let's just use that as an example. You might want to reach out and say, oh, they're not, what can I do to help them? Right? So you're on the playground, or better yet, your nephew comes over and he's the same age as your daughter and he's talking up a storm and your daughter's not. I just want you to start to become conscious of that. Say, oh, well, what can I do to change that? What can I do to help my daughter? Same goes with your own children. Look, I do it. I know I'm not supposed to, but my kids actually, they're 2 years apart to the day on the same,
Okay.
they have the same birthday.
Oh,
So
Wow.
I can just scroll back 2 years in my phone and say, oh, what was he doing? You know,
mm-hmm.
we do it. We're parents. It's impossible not to. Every child has their own trajectory, has their own timeline, definitely. Like I said, not every child is going to wake up at 18 months and start using 40 words. But if they are not learning those new words regularly, if they are plateauing in a way that maybe another toddler isn't, become conscious of that. Start to see, what can I do to help them? I can't tell you not to compare. I don't want to set you up for failure. Everyone does
Yeah.
it.
I really tried not to compare my son and my daughter, but like you said, it's impossible. My son, he was my firstborn, and I was just like, he kind of sets the bar of what I expect just
Mhm.
in all things motherhood. But he was very chatty very early on, lots of sentences, big words before his sister was born, and they're only 17 months apart. So I'm like, by
Right.
17 months, he was using multiple sentences.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, "Can I stabilize this?" I was like, "Have I ever even said stabilize? Like what?" And then Remy, like I said, at 15 months, she had like a handful of words. I was like, "This is really different, really
But you
different."
know what? If you didn't have that point of comparison, you probably wouldn't have thought that. You
Maybe
probably,
not. Yeah.
maybe not. So sometimes comparing helps. Sometimes, a lot of the times, it, triggers that mom guilt that we all have for sure.
Yeah.
But it is impossible not to compare. And you mentioned boys and girls.
Mm-hmm.
A big myth is that boys talk later than girls. You just said a good example of this not being true, right? I have two boys. They are both using 3, 4 word phrases before 20 months old. It's not, there's nothing statistically significant that shows that boys talk later than girls. I think it's very anecdotal. And if
Right.
there's any type of large, significant delay, get help. Reach out for help, regardless of their gender, because it doesn't really matter, right? Don't let boys just go on because they're boys.
I also was curious, like, firstborn, of course, I was like talking to him all the time, reading all the books. And then I add this baby before I even have a 2-year-old. And I'm like, is it something I didn't do? Like you said, the mom guilt. I'm like, I feel like I'm talking around you all the time. I now know after doing her speech therapy, that's not the case. But I'm like, do firstborns versus secondborns generally have more of a speech problem?
Yeah, so you also touched on a point I hear all the time, that am I doing something wrong as a parent, right? Am I failing my toddler? I hear that all the time. And it's not your fault as a parent. So, and I tell parents it just happens sometimes. And sometimes kids just need that jump start, right? I started these strategies because I knew them with my kids at 9 months old. but that's only because I knew them. And firstborn, secondborn, anecdotally, sometimes the secondborn will speak a little bit later. I use later in quotes, nothing significant, maybe a couple of weeks, months. But if you're not seeing that learning happen, you're not seeing them on that upward trajectory, I say that a lot too, of learning new words, reach out for help. There's nothing statistically significant that will tell you your secondborn will speak later than your first.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will use the phrase, my oldest is speaking for my youngest,
Oh yeah, talking for.
Mm,
talking for them. So that must
mhm.
be why they're not talking.
Yeah. And oh, there are some times where they are talking for your youngest, or your older one is talking for your younger one. But that shouldn't hinder your younger one from learning those words, right? The expectation would be that if they're talking for them, they're still learning the words, they're still
Mhm.
getting exposed to it, they're still able to use them. So if that's not happening, then maybe they just need some more tailored strategies, your younger one. But there's nothing statistically significant that says your younger child most likely is going to talk later than your first. And just
Right.
like boys and girls, don't let that go on just because of what you've been told, right? Because then your little one misses out.
True. What do you think? Okay, so my daughter was a COVID baby. She was born in October of 2020. So, we weren't around as many people, and when we were, she couldn't see their mouth. Do you
Hmm.
think that has an impact on like COVID babies as a whole when it comes to speech?
Yes. Yes. COVID changed the game for speech therapists. It changed the game for teachers, any educators, really. COVID, I always said COVID was absolutely horrible, but business-wise, I had a lot more kids because they weren't exposed to other kids. People were wearing masks. There was a delay. Kids weren't in school, right? So kids went back to school. They missed kindergarten and first grade, basically, being in a school. And so even things like waiting in a line, right? Taking turns to cross the hallway, things that like you just sort of learn that these kids didn't learn. The same was happening with speech. A lot of articulation difficulties because people were wearing masks. They couldn't see your face. A lot of delayed language because they weren't exposed, they weren't out. Yeah, COVID really did a number on
Yeah.
kids for sure.
That's so crazy to think back about that
I know,
time.
because I had my son in 2019 and then my daughter in 2020. So I'm like, is that part of this huge difference in y'all too?
Yeah, it was such a weird time. Like I don't even know what
Yeah,
to call it anymore.
nobody does.
It was just the fact that it happened is so crazy.
Yeah, it's wild to think back.
Mhm.
But yeah, it had a huge impact on speech and language development for sure in those kids.
What's your favorite tip, like, to tell people like starting out with speech therapy?
My best tip, my favorite thing to tell them is if you are going to traditional one-to-one speech therapy, get homework, learn carryover strategies because if you don't know what to do between Monday's session and Thursday's session, you're leaving progress on the table. If
Mhm.
your toddler is going to speech therapy and a speech therapist is working with them, but you don't know what to do at home and they're going once a week, there's like over 70 other hours in that week that you could be progressing their speech if you don't know the strategies. So, my biggest tip and advice to parents is learn the strategies, whether they're in traditional speech therapy or not.
Okay. I mean, that makes so much sense, obviously.
No,
Yeah.
with Remy, we definitely had a lot of homework.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you should. And that's the first thing I ask parents is, are they in speech therapy? Because I'll get parents that come to me that I don't know. Are they in speech therapy? Yes, they're in speech therapy. Do you know what to do between sessions? And that answer a lot of times is no. And it's not always necessarily the therapist's fault, right? You have a 30-minute session. You need to work with the kid, train the parent, let the parent, there's a lot that has to happen in a
Hmm.
30-minute session. Whereas if you get a training or you want to work with me, right, it's dedicated time to you. So it's different. It's coaching. It's not working with your toddler. There's only so much a therapist can do in a 30-minute session, right?
Right.
And then
So
parents will also say, oh, they worked with me, not my toddler in the session. And then we're like, double-edged sword here. We can't really
Yeah.
win.
Yeah.
right. My nephew got diagnosed with speech apraxia. I
Mm.
had never heard of that. We just thought he was having a hard time talking, like a little maybe delayed. And finally, when he got into speech therapy for that, like even me being his aunt, I'm like, wait, what do I need to be doing? Because he was really struggling with that.
Yeah, so apraxia is a whole other beast,
Ball
right?
game. Yeah.
So you can't really be diagnosed with apraxia until you're about four, three or
Yes, he
four
was
years
older.
old. You,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you can't truly be diagnosed. So I will get a lot of parents with a toddler that says they have apraxia, or I think they have apraxia, or suspected apraxia. And a lot of therapists will use suspected apraxia if they're not picking up new words regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And but there's nothing you can do about it at that point besides learn the same strategies that you would if they were language delayed.
Okay, so you're
Because
doing the same thing.
apraxia, it's exactly the same. Apraxia is pretty rare. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a term that I think parents like because it gives an answer. And I know that as a parent, you want answers. Why isn't my toddler talking? Why aren't they doing this, right? It
Mm-hmm.
gives them an answer when realistically, from whenever they start, whenever they're not, you first realize that they're not using language to that official apraxia diagnosis, you need to be modeling language using the same strategies as you would if they were a language delayed toddler.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
exactly the same. And then later, if they're diagnosed with something else, then that's a different, you have to work on that differently.
So while we're touching on this, if anybody wants to know, can you explain like exactly what apraxia is?
Yeah, so apraxia is a motor planning difficulty. So apraxia is your child knows what they want to say. It's not a language difficulty. They have the language, but their brain can't make their mouth do what their mouth needs to do. So everything that you use to talk, we call them your articulators, it's muscle memory. And so what happens in apraxia is there's some signal that's missed between your brain and your mouth. When we're talking, we don't think about it. We just say what we're going to say, and our mouth moves and it makes the sounds we need. In apraxia, kids have a lot of difficulty with this. Sometimes they need to learn how to make the sound one by one, sound by sound, and then how to put them together. And it's repetition and muscle memory for them to create those associations between their brain and their mouth. So
Okay.
sometimes what you'll see is groping, like they're trying, they can't make the sound, they can't imitate the sound. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not they're trying, but they can't imitate it. And that's a sign of apraxia also. But it's a motor planning difficulty. It's not a language delay.
Okay. I never could have explained it again what it was.
I know you explained it really well when he
When
was
I
first
found out.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I couldn't have explained that again.
Yeah, so you'll see it in kids with apraxia, they have a very limited, what we call consonant repertoire. So maybe they use one consonant because
Mm,
that's the one that they can readily make when they need
okay.
to. And
Yeah.
you need to train you need to train your tongue to go up to say, "t," and you need to train your mouth to round for, oh, we don't think about it,
Right.
but it takes a lot of muscles to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's taken a lot of work for him, for sure.
And apraxia is a long road and
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily go away, right? He could always be thinking about it. It
Mhm.
gets easier and it's different and it changes as he progresses, but there could be some sound that he always has to just be conscious of.
Right. Okay. Would you tell our listeners about your training course?
Yes, sure. So I have a training course that you can grab, and I mentioned before I will give a code. The code is, let me make sure, Mom Talk. You get 15% off if you're listening to this
Perfect.
podcast. It is a training that will teach you the strategies you need to know to get your toddlers talking. It's self-paced. It's me. on the screen training you. There are lots of other resources you can get in there as well. You can get a 10-day vocabulary challenge where you'll get an email every day for 10 days with 2 words, 2 activities on how to teach those words using the strategies that you learn in the course. There's a training on what not to do, right? There's a lot of things that maybe we're doing that we don't realize that are hindering our toddler's language. There is a done for you schedule of the day, very common routines in a schedule, exactly what words to target in those and how to target it. A lot of this is I'm trying to think for you. I don't want you to have to think so hard. I'll give you all the tools and then you go out and do it. So that's called the Tiny Talkers Jumpstart Training.
Oh, perfect. And where can everybody find you in all this information?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is Hershey Speech Coach, and everything is there. You can send me a DM. I'm happy to chat. If you have any questions, I love answering questions and talking, so don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.
Okay, perfect. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you want to leave our guests with?
I don't think so. I mean, the big tip is just don't wait. Reach out. If you have any questions, just ask a specialist. Ask your pediatrician for a referral. You do not need to wait for someone to tell you to get a referral. You can do it on your own and learn the strategies at home, because if you're not incorporating them into your daily routine, you're leaving progress on the table. So those are my biggest takeaways. And just reach out if you have questions. Most people, including myself, are happy to answer them.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. Thank you so much. You were so fun to talk to. I feel like we learned a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.